Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Home Theater United. I'm Sam Poston, and tonight I am joined by Mr. Brent Watkins, a musician focusing on immersive audio experiences. And he's got a couple albums out and is going to talk to us about Dolby Atmos authoring, especially for music. And I've been really excited to get into this topic because as you know, the goal of Home Theater United is to talk to folks in all areas of the industry, and we haven't really talked to somebody who's into sound design and authoring the actual back end of Atmos design and things along those lines. So I'm really excited to have him on. Brent, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Hey, and thank you for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. I found Brent on Reddit of all places. He was talking about a pretty cool project he's got going. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. But Brent, you bill yourself as an immersive recording artist, and you've just launched your new website and the second album. And what does it mean to you to focus on immersive music, and what kind of music are you creating?
Well, first thing, thanks so much for having me on your show.
Sure.
I'm glad we got connected on Reddit, and I've been getting familiar with your podcast, and I think it's just great.
Oh,
So
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I'm going to have to give you kind of a long view of my interest. Not just in music, but in music reproduction.
Oh,
So I was a
that's
kid.
great. That's the point of the podcast. We're here for as long as you want to wax philosophic on it.
Well, that's why I love podcasts, is they have time to get the context right. So that's great. I appreciate that.
Sure thing.
But anyway, I was a kid in the 60s. My dad was like a bona fide audiophile, had like the sickest setup growing up. It was great. And among my earliest memories, seriously, like one of my earliest memories was him asking me to hold a soldering iron, like real still, while he put together a Dynakit tube amp.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
yeah, yeah. And for the vintage audiophile fans, he had a pair of AR3As. We had the Pat 5 preamp. I mean, this stuff would sell for some serious money today. So, but both my parents were extremely musical, and they were into all different types of music. My dad's interest, was from classical to jazz to Dixieland. I mean, it was all encompassing. My mom was from down south, so she grew up with Elvis and country music. So yeah, really musical household. But my dad's interest in the hi-fi gear transferred to me really quickly. I mean, I guess that's why I have kind of both feet planted in separate sides of the creative process as a musician. I mean, like on one hand, I love to create music, but the other loves to engineer, and is really into the production and reproduction of music. So, I also believe, just to be a well-rounded musician, I think you really have to devour all kinds of music. So, in addition to just growing up with that, I think it's become a real asset for me to have not just been exposed to so much music in my youth, but really being taught to embrace all good music. So anyway, I'm really attentive to the work of a lot of different artists that I've been influenced by. And I really have a keen experience and interest in both experiencing music as a listener and, as a creator. Now, so in the 60s, to get the context to answer your question, and a really, maybe, like I said, a long view perspective. So in the 60s, stereo wasn't exactly a novelty. I mean, the advance from monophonic to stereophonic music really had been underway going back to the early 50s, but the 60s was really the time period where it came of age. It was interesting because, the record labels had these huge libraries of music recorded in mono that were no longer selling because, I mean, the general music consuming public had fully bought into stereo being better. And, a lot of that was just simple marketing. Maybe not many people could explain why it was better. And they just knew it was. And if you went into a hi-fi shop and asked the salesman, hey, what's the big deal? Why do I need stereo now? I remember they'd have a system set up and they'd put on a record and they'd simply switch their amp between mono and stereo. And pretty much everyone would have that, aha moment, because the difference is really striking. But these, record labels initially used gimmicks to keep selling the older monophonic recordings, and each had their own branding. Some called it like electronically enhanced for stereo or stereo compatible. I don't know. Any of your vinyl collectors will know exactly what I'm
Sure.
talking about.
Yeah.
But all of this was bullshit, because all they were doing was using like some reverb and primitive EQ bounce between two channels to give it some notion of separation, but it had nothing to do with true stereo. And I think there are so many parallels right now between the coming of age with stereo and now the coming of age with Atmos. And it really goes back to, again, like my dad, who was this audiophile who came back from the war with some money and decided, he wanted a great sounding stereo, and I think audiophiles at the time were, well, first of all, they trashed those efforts that, the labels, the crap the labels were trying to pull by repackaging old mono records as new stereo records. So we really have the audiophiles, I think, at the time to thank for that, so that the serious music fans, they would avoid those re-releases, they wouldn't sell, and they demanded the music be produced specifically for stereo sound systems. I mean, they spent all that money, they wanted the benefit.
Yeah,
But
of
this
course.
meant,
Yeah.
so this, I think, meant a flurry of new releases, not to mention everything that was happening in pop music at the time with the English Invasion, the Beatles, and all of this new, exciting music. And I think we really had a golden age of music and recording technology in the 60s. And so, moving into the 70s with the advent of multi-track tape recorders and, advances in production techniques, serious sound engineers, record producers, and musicians started thinking about, okay, what's the next best thing? I mean, if stereo's great, then speakers all around you would be fantastic, right? So, and I was really, like, I was now in my teens in the 70s, and I just I spent the days buried in Stereophile magazine and Hi-Fi, and I can't remember all the different magazines. But, I was fascinated when I first read the word quadraphonic. I'm like, oh, wow, of course, that's the next big thing. Two speakers, now you got four speakers all around you. But, the problem really was the end user format. And I don't have like the exact figures. I didn't research this, but let's say 80% of all music purchases were vinyl records. I mean, true audiophiles might have a reel-to-reel tape machine, but they were a pretty small minority. Otherwise, you had like the 8-track, which was awful, and then you had the 70s. The cassette deck really came of age in the mid 70s. Okay.
Yeah, that's where I come in. So,
All right.
so setting a level here.
Okay, good. That's good to know. But the thing is, none of these tape formats were robust enough for quadraphonic audio. And really, records was what the consuming public was, they expected. Nothing was on the horizon that would be replacing vinyl anytime soon. Certainly the CD was another 10 years away, okay? But the vinyl records, well, first of all, I mean, vinyl is fraught with playback challenges in regular stereo, okay? So while there were a limited number of quadraphonic records produced at the time, the problems packing all that audio information into the narrow vinyl grooves posed really more problems than they solved. And I have some quadraphonic records, and they have like way more surface noise than just my regular stereo records. And then you had this quadraphonic stylus, which had it had a hard time tracking, the four different areas of the groove. So
Sure, yeah.
bottom line is, no one was lining up for these releases. I mean, not to mention the added expense of buying new amps and every other piece of equipment needed along the signal path. By the late 70s, I don't really remember hearing much about quadraphonic audio anymore. There simply wasn't the market for it. There wasn't a demand. The labels weren't behind it. It would take, I think, advances in technology and like a much more compelling cost benefit technology to revive interest in surround sound. But, leave it to the movie industry to become that driving force. And to be fair, I think film production has always been a driving force to advance audio reproduction technology. I mean, from the advent of the talkies all the way through Quad 5.1, now THX, and of course, Atmos formats. I mean, cinema has always strived to create the most immersive theatrical experience possible, and I mean, it's for good reason. They needed a reason for people to continue buying tickets to a movie theater after the rapid rise of television. People forget that, with the advent of television, the movie producers, the movie theaters, they were feeling really threatened, and for good reason. I mean, the price of a ticket back then wasn't that much cheaper than it is now. And that was the only game in town if you wanted to see, if you wanted entertainment. So as in an answer to television, the screens got wider, the colors got more vibrant, and the sound became more immersive. And, we'll discuss maybe my background in filmmaking, but I've mentored a lot of film students, and I've always made the point telling them that, audio really is the most important technical element that must be its absolute best in your filmmaking. And why? Well, you can forgive a shot that might be slightly out of focus, or maybe the lighting's not that great, but you can't forgive not being able to hear the dialogue. I mean, that renders the shot completely unusable. So, not to mention then you've got the film score, and the music that companions the film is really that third leg on which the entire production stands. And I should say, the entire notion of films being silent, films were never silent. Okay, silent movies always were accompanied by a large theatrical organ that would be installed in a premium, theater, iconic theater. Or at the very least, like your smallest theater would have some guy at the piano, guy or gal at the piano, playing music to accompany the movie. And so even before talkies, theaters were already having to be aware of acoustics, amplification, and the elements that would really, become the foundation of audio technology. So, if you don't have cinematography, if you don't have editing, and if you don't have a film score, if you take away any one of those things, you don't have a movie. And, at least not one that people want to watch. But, you have to have those three components. And so given that the film score and even the audio intrinsic to the content, the subject of the film itself, is so vitally important, I think it's only natural that here we are in the 21st century, 2023, and once again, we're seeing that the convergence of, we'll say film technology, technically, it's video technology and audio technology have come together to create some of the most immersive experiences, I mean, far beyond what I could have ever imagined in someone's home, I mean, really, you don't have to have a huge investment to have an amazing experience watching a movie at home. And I believe by natural extension, listening to music. So, I've been very fortunate. When I was young, I could only dream. Okay, I could only bury myself in those stereophile magazines, hoping that one day I might be able to own a pair of AR9s instead of the AR3s,
Sure.
and and of course my career, I began as an audio engineer, working at a recording studio, actually an intern at Rosewood in Kansas City, and then moved back home, got a job with a local ABC affiliate, and because, I mean, I was hired as like the weekend camera person making $4 an hour at the time.
Yeah.
And, and and I was like, okay, so how long do I have to do this gig that I just get weekends? I've got a college loan to pay back, right? And they're like, oh, you'll have to be here, I mean, probably at least a year before you get, considered for full time. Because, hey, television, I mean, this was, when television was huge and everybody wanted to work in television. And so it was really competitive and the pay was crap. But I thought, okay, whatever. And then the position opened for, first of all, the morning audio engineer. And I went right in. I'm like, I'm your guy. I live, eat, and breathe this stuff. My internship, look at my resume. I was hired. So I got moved into that position like 3 weeks after I started. Made a bunch of people way jealous, but that was my foot in the door. And since then, I've always been working in some branch of media production. I had my own production company for a while, done both film and audio work. So bottom line is now we're in the 90s and I've got a career. And because my career revolves around sound and video and, media production, I bought my first system. So it was a 5.1 surround sound. I remember like it was a Sony AVR, and I got Sony speakers. It was very, very inexpensive, very basic, but it was, oh, and I had my whopping 36-inch standard def TV. I mean, this was the day, like back when entertainment centers had to be like really heavy furniture because
Yeah.
the weight of those, tube TVs. I think that 36-inch huge TV we had didn't weigh too much less than like my 75-inch,
And
4K panel.
was this DVD era or prior to that?
No, this is, well, that's a good question. It was just DVDs were just coming out, and that was like, oh my gosh, DVDs are so cool. They were just coming out. We spent most of our time, like, my family and the kids, watching our library of VHS tapes, and of course you'd go rent those. And so it was just switching over. I remember like getting my first PC that would support a DVD, and that was just wild. So yeah, it was kind of as those that transition from analog to digital was kind of getting underway. But anyway, fast forward to about 5 years ago, and now, my long career in media production has paid off. The kids are grown and out of the house, so I can spend the kind of money I've always hoped to. But, getting a system put together that really is kind of like my dream system. And I was first focused on the home theater because that's what I could talk my wife into spending money for. But at the same time, I also decided I'd get really serious about my work as a musician. I mean, I've worked off and on as a pianist since I was in my teens, and actually released a pair of solo piano CDs that got some traction in the mid 2000s. But my interests really turned towards a parallel passion I had since my teen years, and that was electronic music. And, again, it's about the resources. I had since that as a kid, I was in a band in college. I had keyboards and stuff, but to like do the work of like, the groups I was a huge fan of, groups like Tangerine Dream, Kraftwerk, Klaus Schulze, basically all the artists that emerged from the music scene that started in the late 60s in Hamburg, Germany. I was totally into that scene. But those guys must have had, come from money or something, because,
Yeah.
the level, the complexity, first of all, you couldn't do it with one keyboard. You had to
Right.
have maybe 5 keyboards.
Yep.
And one of those needed to be a Moog synthesizer, which alone cost like, back in the day, I mean, it cost
Sure.
like $100,000.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I did not have the opportunity to really get into the music I love. But with advances, again, we're living in a digital age, advances in technology, now I can. So,
I
you
mean,
know,
you can have a Moog on your iPad for $1.99
oh
now.
my God. I mean, so we'll talk about this. I don't want to skip ahead because I,
Yeah.
I am actually winding my way to an
Sure,
to
sure.
an
No, no.
answer
I
to your
love it.
question, but I bookmarked that because I definitely want to talk about that. But the bottom line is here I am with a modest 5.1.2 Dolby Atmos home theater with like a 55-inch 1080p panel that we just had and had around. So got into that. I upgraded to then the 7.1.4 Dolby Atmos. Got a bitchin' 75-inch, like I said, 4K panel, TCL Series 6. At the same time, I built out a pretty robust digital audio workstation where I can compose and noodle around, and I do that in Apple Logic Pro X. So to get back to what you were just saying, Apple Logic Pro X is like having every synthesizer that ever existed and every loop library. I mean, it's so unfathomably deep and rich in terms of all the resources they provide you. I feel like I'm still scratching the surface. And on top of that, add their what came out with this latest version, the Alchemy synthesizer, which basically incorporates some AI in terms of getting the sound you want really quickly without like thumbing through just patch after, thousands of patches. And the drum, the whole percussion module, and it's mind blowing, really. And so it just turbocharged my creativity. I'm like, I have got this amazing resource. I'd be an idiot not to fully leverage all I can do with it to just be the musician I always wanted to be.
So to be clear, in case people didn't pick up on it, your production studio and your home theater are essentially the same system.
They are. They
Yeah.
are. And I'm pretty proud of that. And that basically is a testimony to how cheap I am. you know,
Well, we say bang for the buck on the Home Theater United. So
Right, right. I wanted the
yeah,
most bang for the buck. Absolutely,
exactly. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and so there has been just a very unique convergence of opportunity because Logic Pro X, the big deal about that release, which was the latest version, is that it supported Dolby Atmos. Now, everyone got excited about that. But hey, surprise, I don't think people really know what that means. They're like, because I didn't. I was like, oh, it supports Dolby Atmos. Get that? Now, producing Dolby Atmos. If it were only that easy, it was,
Yeah, I mean
it's
it's a
been a
whole new
journey.
way of thinking about audio
Yeah.
production, right? I mean, it's going from targeting individual speakers to now you've got a volume of sound that you can move objects through. And
Yeah,
that's a mind blower, right?
it is. It is. And, it's like what you do with that tool. I mean, first of all, to just back up, so this is like we're talking about a year, maybe 18 months since this was released. I don't know exactly, but I know it like had just been released when I bought my copy and had upgraded my workstation. But up until that point, the only people who could produce in Dolby Atmos would have to be people, studios that had invested in the full studio version of Avid's Pro Tools. And that's about a $3,000 piece of software. I'm not talking about the light version or whatever some people have at home. I'm talking about the full Dolby certified cinema recording partner version of Avid Pro Tools. And so that is just not within reach for your average indie artist like me. So, with that new powerful tool I have now, I began learning everything I could about Atmos music production. And at the same time, I was composing music that was really about building soundscapes. And I think this is where I'm going to eventually answer your question. But, I was about composing these soundscapes, these kind of cosmic soundscapes, to be specific in terms of what they were, because I had in mind building the space as much as, the music itself. And so anyway, it's like, I guess, well, it goes back to the dawn of stereo. I really feel like we're in kind of that same place now. And, it's like uh, producing, I guess the connection to producing in like an immersive 3D environment, it wasn't like some tangent because, okay, I just got this software and I want to use it. I mean, to me, I was in a really immersive space listening to the music. That's why I love the music. And, it began, I remember as a kid with the first pair of great headphones I got, and how I mean, binaural is pretty immersive if you think about it,
Oh yeah, 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 and it's getting a resurgence too, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, just we met on Reddit, and of course, I'm sub to all the subs that are about audio, and yeah, that headphone sub is blowing up. I mean, there are so many young people who are just all about the headphones now, and really, it's great to see their enthusiasm when they discover just how good they can be. But you know, so I'm thinking, well, okay, so and I've already been watching movies on the home theater in Atmos, and I'm like, whoa, it was mind blowing. I'm thinking, okay, this music I'm hearing in this movie, how awesome would it be, to create music in that same kind of space? And I'm not talking about like gimmicky production techniques where instruments are whizzing around the room like, so many avatars, an avatar or
Sure,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know that, and I'm sure there's a place for that, but the experience of actually being in a space beyond the room you're in, that's what that's what I'm after. That's what I hope the listener experiences when, if they're fortunate enough to be able to listen in a true Atmos space. But yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That is probably the longest answer to the first question I've asked ever on the show, but I appreciate it. It really does tell us where you're coming from and what you're interested in. And when you first started talking about electronic music, I'm thinking like EDM type stuff, but your stuff
Mhm.
is way more atmospheric and taking somebody on a like a journey of sound kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that will be my longest answer tonight. Okay.
Well, I'm actually a little bummed that our my original co-host Brian Dobbs is not on the show because he actually has a couple albums of atmospheric music as well, and he had been kind of noodling getting into you know kind of transitioning that to Atmos. Is that even something that's possible? Can you take pre-recorded stereo sound and move it into Atmos?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so how does
Yep.
that work?
Absolutely. And in fact, anyone who's subscribed to Apple Music and who has an Apple TV device
Yep.
on their set, okay, first of all, they are going to be able to plug that HDMI output into their AVR, assuming. Oop, here's a reminder. Sorry. Now that I'm glad we were close to the break on the question there. I apologize. I
No,
wasn't thinking of
no worries.
Alexa.
My phone's been beeping for a meeting that I'm not going to tonight at 8 o'clock. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I apologize for that. So let's just pick it up with your question about, like releasing old, music in the Atmos. I think we've got an edit point there. I'll just
sure,
launch in
sure.
if that's okay.
Let me jump in with the question. You can go for it.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So the bottom line is that I know a lot of what Apple's put out on Apple Music has been like remastered stuff from stereo into Atmos. Can you walk us through that process? And is it really as simple as just taking stuff designed for stereo and spreading it around a little bit? How does the object based stuff work in a conversion like that?
Yeah, well, So as you said, and this is a testimony to kind of how serious our commitment, when I say our, I mean the music industry's commitment is to Atmos, and that is the fact that these labels are releasing entire catalogs, okay, in Atmos. For example, Talking Heads, Beyonce, Nina Simone. I mean, the list goes on
Yeah,
and
yeah.
on. Prince,
The
Earth, Wind, and
Beatles.
Fire, Beatles,
Yeah.
and so if anyone thinks this is a flash in the pan, forget it, because that we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in production investment right there. Okay, and so to answer your question, it depends. I've heard some of these re-releases that are just amazing. For example, Ella Fitzgerald sings Irving Berlin. It I think this was recorded in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. So I'm not even sure how many tracks they were drawing from for the Atmos mix, but it was enough because you are in the orchestra pit with Ella. It's fantastic. Okay. Now, others are not making what I would consider the best choices, so that in the worst case, like you described, it just does sound like they kind of spread out stereo a little bit, and they put some things from behind you, and it just didn't seem like a lot of thought had gone into the production, because there's a lot of, a lot of what do I want to say, theory, or kind of, an engineering perspective. I mean, where do you want your audience? That's the first question. Um, do you want your audience in a table by the band? Do you want them middle of the room with a great space that has these amazing acoustics? Do you want to be in the recording studio, which is kind of the tack that they took with the Beatles, where it's like, Paul's on your left and, John's on your right. I mean, you're right there, and it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, and we had the same thing with movies too, right? That there was this whole philosophy that everything should be front heavy and a little bit of stuff from the rears, and
Mhm.
then you go to War for Planet of the Apes, and you are literally in the middle of an avalanche and snowstorm and stuff
Mhm.
like that. The example I
Yep.
use in Atmos music is Tom Sawyer, where you're literally hearing the jumps from Neil Peart in 360 around you. You are in his seat, and the danger is that that becomes a gimmick, right? And so
Absolutely.
and so I mean, it's a talent, and it takes a talented engineer to figure out where you want to position that so that it's not a gimmick. And I absolutely don't feel like the Neil Peart example is a gimmick. I
No,
think
no,
that I think that that was a brilliant choice, and I love that immersiveness, but I know a lot of producers are very reticent to go full bore on it.
yeah, it's because difficult decisions have to be made, and inevitably someone won't be happy with, those decisions. But, those decisions, my point is those decisions are made in stereo. Okay. And if you go back again, I'm all about the history. If you go back to
Hey,
like
hey,
the
hey,
early
hey,
60s,
hey, Brent, we're having some audio loss on your side. Are you away from the phone, or is that just the Skype being weird?
it must be Skype. Everything sounds beautiful to me.
Okay, we'll go with it.
Are we good?
Yeah, I think so. It just seems intermittent, and it's probably just FiOS on my end.
Okay. Yeah, I hope it's not a bandwidth issue, but I think we're good.
Okay,
Okay.
so
So let me just
yeah,
pick
pick
that
that
up,
up.
or if you want to, I can pick it up. So, I love history, and if you go back to say the early 60s, the early, like at 64 with the Beatles' early releases, about that time period, you have engineers that really didn't know or understand the proper use of the panoramic potentiometer, which is pan pot. Now we just shorten it to pan. It seems like a very easy knob. It just moves things from the left to the right, but they were making awful decisions that we are forever stuck with. Okay. Like putting all of the instruments exclusively on the left or right, so that you've got, like, if you had a jazz trio, the bass would be on the left, the trumpet would be on the right, the drums kind of maybe in both speakers, but they just didn't get how to make a natural blend, where the mix was somewhere in between. And and we are having, I think there are some recordings out there where time will not be kind to the decisions those engineers made, because quite honestly, it can range. It's like a zoom lens. If you watch movies that came out shortly after the zoom lens was invented, everything had to have this snap zoom, like, ooh, look at me, I can use my zoom lens. Well, sometimes today you can tell there are engineers that are like, ooh, look at this, I can make this move around the room. Isn't that cool? And then it ends up, in the master, and we're forever stuck with them, having some goofy take on where an instrument starts and stops at. So yeah, and so when people are like, oh, I hate Atmos music, it's just a fad, or it just ruins everything. Well, it's not the technology. Unfortunately, it's the engineers and the production decisions they're making.
I mean, it's also day one or year one, if you want to think about it that way, right? So that we haven't gotten to the point where the conventions are settled and there's like best
Exactly.
practices out there, and we definitely saw that with the launch of Apple Music, where there was just so many different styles of production that it put a lot of people off. They're like, "Whoa, I kind of like that Neil Peart effect, and I
Hmm.
want everything to have that," and you're just not going to get that, right? It's you're going to be at the whims and mercy of the source material and how well that translates to different rooms, and what the goal was of the production team.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these things are, still being worked out. And I am, because I'm just like everyone else. I spend a lot of money on my system. Okay, I want to listen to, I want to spend a couple hours every night listening to music in Atmos. All right, so I'm devouring a ton of stuff. And you mentioned Tom Sawyer. I just heard a new release by one of my favorite electronic artists, William Orbit. And he was most known for the Strange Cargo series of CDs. Just a brilliant British electronic musician, Grammy nominated, just great guy. So he's just released an album called The Painter, and he makes it clear from like the first minute that I listen to this album, that the Atmos space is his canvas. I honestly think that's why he must have named the album The Painter, because this is like, I won't say the only, but one of the few albums I've listened to that is like my vision. It's like, this is what I want to be doing. I want something that is an immersive space, because all of these philosophical decisions that we've just been talking about relate to, say, real musicians and scratch that, rewind. I'm a real musician. Electronic musicians are real musicians, but I should say acoustic musicians in an
Mhm.
acoustic space doing a traditional live performance. Okay, and whether that's in the studio or in a live concert, whatever, it doesn't matter. All of the decisions are based that this was actually acoustic music being made in acoustic space. So this is where all these decisions, we talked about, rest. I mean, where's the audience going to be? Well, in electronic music and genres, as I was describing, which, like cosmic, Germans called it kosmische music. And then I think a British DJ started calling it krautrock, and that name stuck. But this is a whole flow of music that came out of Germany and then England. Brian Eno was a part of it all through the 70s. And that genre of music is whatever space you want it to be. I mean, so now it really does put the space you're creating as a component of the music itself. All right. And William Orbit's The Painter, any of your listeners that do have a full Atmos system, check it out. He makes full use of the Atmos space. It's done just exceptionally well. It's a brilliant album. It's a wondrous accomplishment.
Well, we will definitely put that into the show notes, and I'm assuming it's on Apple Music, so we'll put some
Yeah,
links in there and maybe find a video on YouTube as
yeah.
well. Besides William Orbit, what are some of your other favorite Atmos experiences?
Okay, well, I'll lurch into like a completely different musical gear, but I had Spielberg's 2021 remake of West Side Story. Don't know, I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the music director, but that soundtrack for West Side Story, I mean, it's just an iconic part of the American songbook to begin with, but the soundtrack's in full Atmos, just as it is in the film. And, whether or not 50s musicals are your cup of tea or not. I mean, it's West Side Story. So, come on. And the soundtrack puts you right in the pit orchestra. The sound is just jaw-droppingly immediate and dimensional, and that would be a whole nother, topic, which is to talk about how an properly configured Atmos sound system will definitely help you hear things you've never been able to hear before, without question, in the source content. So yeah, those are just a couple that come to mind. But I literally, if you go on Mondays, I believe, or Sundays, it could be one of but the beginning of the week, I always check my browse. What is it called? Like, not listen now, but let me open up my browse. Yeah, just the browse section in their menu, and you scroll down and you'll get spatial audio, and that's where Apple puts all the new releases. So like every Sunday or Monday, I'll just fire up the Apple TV, scroll down in the browse section on Apple Music, and see what's new this week, because it's been like every week there's something new. So that's pretty cool.
I definitely echo that. When Apple Music first launched their Atmos stuff, they had recommended lists for every genre, from rock to pop to classical and things like that, and they were keeping them up to date too, right? They were moving new selections
Yeah,
in and out, and so I, I
absolutely.
I remember the browse, the spatial audio really did highlight some of the latest and greatest things. So that's cool. It's been a minute since I pulled that up, but we'll definitely link to those lists as well. That's great. And it was Leonard Bernstein and Sondheim did the original on,
Right.
and I believe the new composer is David Newman. Does
David
that
Newman,
sound?
that's the name I was missing. You're right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's the great thing about the show is that I can do stuff in the background while people
Oh,
while people finish their answers. So that's great.
yeah.
So Brent, tell me a little bit about the actual process of recording in your home theater slash production studio. Can you actually listen to, say sounds be positioned in 3D space at, as you're developing, or how does that work?
Absolutely. So, like we discussed, I wanted the most bang for my buck. And seriously, as I was thinking about what I would need to create an Atmos studio, I was just like, well, I've got Atmos in the home theater. Why can't I use that? And I mean, I was careful to place my speakers to do everything in accordance to Dolby's guidelines for properly configured Atmos home theater. And so it was really just about the speakers, okay? Because there's nothing else that will translate. You can't produce what a lot of people quickly discover once they buy Logic Pro X and think they're going to just immediately start producing in Dolby Atmos, is that's just the beginning of the piece of the puzzle you need. You're going to need a 12-channel audio interface for all your I/O. Then you're going to need a multi-channel amp to support all of the channel IOs that come from your Dolby Atmos renderer, which they don't tell you you really need. So you really can't just produce Atmos out of the gate with Logic Pro X. You have to also purchase the Dolby Atmos renderer that's a part of their production suite, because that really gives you the tools to manage that interface, and most importantly, to configure the room properly for faithful playback of an Atmos master. But to answer your question, I absolutely, let me just finish the whole thing there. So I've got that, I've got a Focusrite 18i20, which is up to 20 outputs, so that more than enough to handle my needs. and I scored a really sweet B&K AV1230 12 channel amp off eBay. This was like a $1,500 amp. I got it for $300. And then, of course, you have to be able to switch between the amps. Obviously, I can't feed the same set of speakers with two different amps at the same time. And if you try to just turn off one of the amps, the load's all whack. So like the AVR will just shut down, say something's hinky with your speaker connections. I'm not turning on for you. So I discovered that. So I bought a series of AV amp switches. And when I want to go from home theater mode to Atmos production studio mode, all I have to do is turn on the Atmos gear, flip all the switches, plug in my Apple Mac Studio, and I'm good to go. And from that point, I am in an Atmos studio. I have complete control over the source content. I have it sounding, and I have 2 albums under my belt, so I know now how accurate the mix I think I'm making in my studio actually is when it comes back to me through Apple Music, and Apple TV, and it's right as rain. So that's it. That's how I do it, and it was the most challenging project I've probably ever undertaken as someone who professes to be an audio engineer. Managing the IO assignments, and it was all. I couldn't have done it actually without the help of Dolby Labs. So they have a Dolby Atmos Producers Forum, and it's really well moderated, well managed, because if I ask my questions there, I get an engineer with an answer usually within 24 hours.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, and so they are the ones I have to thank for stepping me through. Yeah, no, you can't do it over HDMI from your Mac, Mac laptop to your AVR. You cannot produce Atmos that way, and that's too bad because that would have been the cheapest way. But I don't blame them. You have to have dedicated gear. You have to kind of have the stuff that professional studios would have, and I don't blame them for making that the requirement. But
well, we should caveat that with today, right? Because
right. Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
who knows what'll happen in the next release or two. So the bottom line is the answer is no, that an indie producer can't just hook up to a home theater and get reliable results out the gate. It requires, as you said, the focus rate. I forget the actual term for that in an amp, to be able to make the dual system work.
Right.
So that's good to know. But I mean, that's the next step, right? Is that you can do this on an Apple TV at $99, right? So
Right.
you know,
Well,
ma-
and if you go to that Dolby forum, you'll
yeah,
see a long thread of disappointed wannabe Atmos producers.
yeah.
And I'm proud to say I was the first one, because I was like, what? Oh, I thought I could just, no, so this is like every one of us who are trying to go down this path as indie producers are kind of bumping along the same speed bumps, and I'll be honest, I have only talked to maybe 2 other people who are even like remotely close to doing this kind of the way I am, not with the dual kind of studio home theater thing, but just doing it at all as indie producers. They're out there. There's a growing number. I'm starting to network because it's just, I mean, it makes sense that we talk to each other, because there's so much to learn, and certainly so much to teach others who are just getting into it.
Sure. And for all the struggles that you have as a music producer, you can imagine that those are amplified, 1,000% with, indie filmmakers who are like, well, why can't we do this in Atmos too?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's something I could do as well. I mean,
sure.
because again, it's a home theater. I got a 75-inch sweet 4K panel. I could easily do a film score there.
Yep.
I have all the requisite equipment.
So other than streamlining the equipment, what would you like to see as far as the production of Atmos? How do you want to see that progress? Or are you pretty satisfied that it that it worked out with the Logic transition, or what's the
I'm
next step there?
Well, it's been a series of thrills for me. Once you get past the technological hurdles and just getting the gear configured. I mean, the first time I opened my Logic Pro project on my first album and, started positioning things using their 3D spherical panner, uh, and it was just a surreal experience,
The
honestly.
the
It was
kid in the
amazing.
candy store, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Totally. I was like, I was at Willy Wonka's factory, man.
And I know that, like I said, even on the hobbyist side, that people who are testing out audio equipment are like, there's got to be an easier way for this technology to come to lay people, and that you don't have to be a $150,000 a year engineer to understand this.
Right,
And if anybody's
right.
going to do it, it's going to be Apple. I don't know that it'll be this year, but you can tell that the dominoes are lined up for them to get there eventually.
Yeah, I mean, they have a vested interest in Atmos succeeding from every angle. I mean, whether it's the software, whether it's Apple Music, and a big disappointment for us is like, okay, Ventura is going to fully support Atmos. So if your laptop or your Mac Pro or whatever could do Ventura, then you'd be into Atmos. And it's like, well, we discovered, those of us who are producers discovered that's not quite what they meant. They just meant that the HDMI playing, say, an MP4 off your desktop. If the MP4 was an Atmos, then it'd go out HDMI and Atmos. But that's basically what your Apple TV can do. So, not a big deal. What we are looking for is them to fully support the native Atmos production space in terms of I/O, so that we could use, say, HDMI, out into an audio interface, or it could, well, yeah, I don't want to go into all the geeky details, but there's more work to be done. Let's just, say, Apple's done amazing things, but they've still got a little ways to go.
Yeah, but I mean that's Apple's MO, right? They put the first step they put the first
Yes.
step out and get you hooked, and you know that
Yep.
they're eventually going to round around to it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I mean they couldn't get to that step without having done this part first.
Absolutely,
And
and that's very true. Yep.
and the same thing's true on the HDR side, right? So HDR
Yeah.
is
Yep.
obviously important on Apple TV for playback, and
Hmm.
now you've got it on the iPad, you've got it on the MacBooks and stuff like that. But it's not like the whole OS is optimized for HDR or Atmos.
Exactly.
But you can read the tea leaves and see, yeah, I mean that's the next obvious step, and when we get there, it's all going to be milk and honey kind of deal.
Yeah, it's
But
going to be glorious.
yes, but it's going to be pain getting there, and at least a wait. So
Yeah.
we're definitely looking forward to both of that. So you mentioned that you've got a Mac Studio, right?
Yeah.
How do you like that? And any regrets with the newer, cheaper minis coming out with M2s that are kind of pushing up against the performance envelope there?
No regrets. So when I had to make a purchase decision last year.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you jump into a PC, you're jumping at the wrong time.
Yep.
It's like you just have to settle that, okay, this is when I had to make the purchase. So just ignore the fact that they came out with the 16-inch M2 MacBook Pro, next year or this year. So I went with the Mac Studio because it had the power. Okay, it has the M1 Max, and it's all tricked out. I realized I was getting more than a MacBook Pro. Certainly anything that was available at the time. It didn't have a Apple Silicon version of the 16-inch when I made the purchase. I didn't have to pay for like the keyboard and the mouse, which I already had, and I've got a pair of 4K Dell monitors. So I didn't need that. So I'm like thinking, how can I get the most Apple without the things I don't need? And the Mac Studio was just, it checked off all the boxes.
That's brilliant, and it sounds like you and I are definitely in the same frame of mind with that stuff. I did buy the original 16-inch, and obviously they refreshed that this year. No regrets here either. You buy when you need it, and don't look at any reviews after that, right? So,
Yeah, but this, would be news to any would-be producer. You're not going to do this on a 10-year-old laptop,
right,
okay?
right.
And your Apple computer has to support Ventura, and I highly recommend you get as much horsepower as you can. And yes, you probably will have to make a special purchase decision if have been muddling by with an older computer and want to do Atmos production.
So, a lot of your work, the the room considerations are something that it sounds like you're thinking about as you're making the music. At at
Yes.
at this point, is Atmos mastering something that can be like a pass at the end? Do you think, or is it still really the best production? Is keeping that in mind from the start?
Well, if you're producing new music, regardless of genre, you should definitely be thinking of it from the start because that's the time to make those philosophical decisions about where you want the listener in the space, I mean, and it's far easier to do that from the outset than trying to figure it out after certain undoable decisions have been made.
Gotcha. And on a related subject, have you listened to your music through like the spatial audio headphones, and how do you like that experience? And because you're not, I mean, there's no pass that you're going through that does like a headphone check before you release to Apple, right? And
Yeah,
what's your experience been there?
and that's a really, really good question. I'm glad you asked. And the answer is pretty straightforward as far as stereo versus Atmos, and like we were saying, I might have ideas about the Atmos mix, but I'm always optimal destination, okay, which would be um, ceiling mounted speakers in a full 7.1.2 or 7.1.4 configuration. But the reality is, most people who say they've listened to Atmos have done so on maybe some Apple AirPods Pros and hopefully the second generation because they're so much better than the first. But I'll be blunt. That's not Atmos. It's kind of a gimmick.
Oh
You feel
man,
like you've
we're
got your foot in the door to a wonderful new technology, but I've got a pair of AirPod Pro 2s which I use to listen to my Atmos mix. But the sad truth is, there's almost nothing I can do about the mix to make it sound better on my AirPod Pros without. I just Apple does not give you a lot of controls, and their instructions for Atmos producers is leave it on the default settings. We'll take care of the rest. Sometimes that works. Sometimes I've heard spatial audio on my earbuds that are great. Again, it's not like to be compared with a full home theater, but it's pretty cool. And others I've heard that's lousy. I just like switch over to the stereo mix because it sounds so much better. And like my first release, I was kind of happy with on the AirPods, and the second release, I was doing some things that just didn't translate well. So, whether it's like an Atmos soundbar or your AirPod Pros or well, and I hate to be a bear about this, but even the kind of up-firing
yeah,
ceiling, speakers,
the bounce.
yeah, those are all compromises
Yep.
because once you listen to full, properly configured Atmos, which, I've got a brand new Onkyo TXRZ50 with Durac Live, and there has never been a better receiver I've ever listened to or had anything to do with that I could reasonably afford
Right. Right.
as the Onkyo RZ50. And with the Durac, I thought I had a really good sounding system for 7.1.4 before and after getting it was just mind blowing. So all I'm saying is that experience cannot be, you cannot compare um, sound bars or
Sure, sure,
earbuds.
sure.
You're not even in the same ballpark. Okay,
Yep.
so I know, even though I know that 90% of people who are listening to an Atmos mix might be doing that in that environment because it's so much more affordable, I'm really producing for that 1%, and to be honest, I mean, my my audience is so small now as far as my fans. It's like if I got that 1% of Atmos enthusiasts in their home theaters, I'd be doing really good.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and I actually have in my house, I have four separate home theater setups. I have the 7.1.4 on an like a first generation 11 channel Denon downstairs, and again, amazing. You can track objects moving in space like a laser pointer.
Yeah,
I have a bounce set up in my living room. It's satisfying, but it's not nearly the same effect. And then in my game office, I've got some like desktops with bouncers on top of them too, and that's got a vaulted ceiling, and that just wrecks Atmos. But again, it's better than stereo. It's better than 5.1. So
yeah,
every room's a compromise. Even my full home theater, doesn't have a walled back on it because that's where my podcast studio is, and
yeah,
so I think distilling your answer down to, build for the best that you can, envision anybody listening on, and everything else will, the compromises seem to work themselves out based
yeah,
on the algorithms. That's really interesting to know.
yeah,
It might not be the way that you would have done it, but at least it's consistent and works across all the different genres and stuff like that.
yeah. And that's great. I mean, I wish I could send people over to your house so they
Well,
can
they're
listen
welcome
to
to.
the different choices,
Sure.
that they might be considering. But here's the thing. So, okay, going back to the 60s, remember I said, like, you go into a stereo shop and it's like, what's the big deal about stereo? Okay, well, here, mono,
Yep.
stereo.
Yep.
Oh, I see. I hear the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is that happening today? I don't know. Everyone's ordering their gear online,
Well, that's
they're
why
not,
we.
I mean, there's no stereo shop they can go
Yeah.
to where they've pricked out an Atmos,
Yep.
room 7.1.4, and then they've got their stereo room and you can walk from one to the other. That's not happening,
Yeah.
you know.
The closest you can hope for is like a Magnolia built into a Best Buy, and
Yeah.
that's why we send folks, interested in, new members on home theater. We try to get them hooked up with home theater meets, or even go
Mhm.
up to Value Electronics up in New York. And I know there's some similar places out in California where they've got at least a couple different listening rooms. They're still out there, right? They're the small mom and pop places that really care
Mhm.
about that quality. And
Well, keep in mind, I'm in Iowa,
yeah.
so yeah. Well, I'm sure those places exist, just not here.
Well, actually, that brings me to one of the questions I was gonna ask, and was almost nervous to ask. Is like, what's the music scene look like in Iowa, right? So, and do you have other musicians that you work with on your albums, and how does that work?
That's a really good question. So first of all, I think I've kind of painted a picture where I'm in like my own Genesis phase now. I've
Hmm.
done two albums. I'm really proud of them, and that is getting me exposure to other musicians interested in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So that's happening locally. In my defense, and I'm coming to you from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Cedar Rapids, Iowa has always had a very vibrant music
Oh,
scene.
nice. Okay.
It's not your Austin, it's not your Athens, Georgia, okay, or Seattle, but there have been some musicians who've come out of here. Michael Boddicker, who film composer extraordinaire, and we've had a lot of great musicians come out of here, and some of my best friends are full-time gigging musicians based out of here. There's a great music scene. My son is a really successful DJ. He's every weekend all over our area. So yeah, it's a good scene. How many people are interested in Atmos? Well, you know what? I'm kind of like the what would you say? I'm like the wizard on the hill. It's like, if you want to know about that, you can go see Brent. He's all about that. And so I am actually having someone over tomorrow night, who's
Nice.
an up and coming musician who's like, do I need to be doing this? Blah blah blah. I'm like, well, here, come in, have a listen. You tell me if you think you should be doing it.
That's awesome, and we definitely encourage that both at Home Theater Forum and Home Theater United. Is like the whole point of this hobby is to be social. Get people out of their own caves and go talk to other people, and kvetch about new technologies and new hardware. And if you tell me what your budget is, we'll help you spend it. And we just did a whole show on that, so I love to
Yeah.
hear that you've got a community out there both for the music and the theater stuff. So that's great.
And I'll tell you, building that community is as important to me as making the music, because it really is just what you said. It's a social experience. It's an opportunity to bond, to form
Mhm.
relationships, and to learn. And that's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, so changing up a little bit, let's talk about your background a little bit. You've mentioned that you've made a couple documentaries and I think even a feature film. What's in your background there?
So I made two feature documentaries. My first
Okay.
documentary is available on Amazon Prime Video. It's called The Entertainers. It's about a really obscure piano contest. It was once held in Peoria, Illinois. I think they like moved it down to Mississippi now or something. But I'm talking pianists coming from all over the world who play ragtime and stride piano.
Oh wow. Okay.
So basically, an obscure piano contest for a really narrow niche of music. And you
Yeah.
know, I first got the idea because, hey, guess what? I was a competitor back in
Okay.
2004, and when I was just like really getting back in the piano, and I did okay. I mean, I did okay. I was like sixth,
Okay.
so you had to make the top five to be a finalist,
Mm.
but I just missed it. But you know what? I made a good friend, met a good friend of mine, Ethan Luslin, a better pianist than I am, has a great podcast too. But he did make the finals, and we had a great time getting to know each other. And how should I say, the unique community of contest junkies. Okay,
Sure. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and when I competed that first year, I thought it would be like a bunch of old timers dressed up in, like, the honky tonk don't shoot the piano player costumes like you see in the
Oh yeah.
westerns. And I was only half right. I mean, it was actually a bunch of young kids, compared to me anyway, dressed up in honky tonk player piano costumes. But
Neat.
I was blown away. I was like, not only is it an obscure niche of music I happen to have been really into when I was younger, but it's kids. Okay. So, and we're talking about music that dates back to the 19th century.
Yeah. And somehow they found it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were damn good players. So help us get
Yeah,
back into
yeah.
this.
We'll just
Oh,
jump right
yeah.
back in. You were talking
Mm,
about the community of ragtime players
right.
and
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so my buddy Ethan had some good old friends of his that went out to LA, were filmmakers, USC school grads, and so forth. And we ended up joining forces. We spent about 3 years making the movie. Shooting took me all over the United States and actually Mexico, because one of the pianists was in hiding from the United States government. It's a long story. Watch the movie.
Yep.
But we won a lot of awards and film festivals, and it did really well. But other than that, hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention since it was
Hmm.
first released in 2011.
Gotcha.
My second movie, you can see on YouTube. It's called A Hero Among Us, and it's about a World War II Army medic named John Gaultier, he was among the first soldiers to reach the first concentration camp to be liberated
Oh
by the
yeah.
Allies in World War
Yeah.
II. So he is essentially among the first people who weren't Nazis or victims of the Holocaust to lay eyes on the horror, the horror of concentration camps.
Yeah.
I thought it would be unique. I mean, it's a topic that's, I mean, many movies on the Holocaust, and as there should be, I didn't feel like I had anything to add in terms of the experiences that are normally portrayed. So I thought this would be unique because it was looking at what happened to the liberators. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
as you can imagine, at least for my subject, John's life was ruined by the mental trauma he
Yeah.
experienced. I mean, keep in mind, this was like a small town boy from Ohio. Graphic violence, and then consider the time. Okay, graphic violence was completely unknown in movies or anywhere,
Hmm.
in the 1940s. Nothing had even remotely prepared him for what he experienced, other than the horrors of war he just endured. So it wrecked him mentally. He had PTSD before psychiatrists even knew what it was.
Right. Yeah.
They called it shell shock back then.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was also able to get a hold of someone who was a prisoner at this small Austrian concentration camp that he liberated.
Oh, that's
Now,
amazing.
they never met, but I think the compelling story arc was how did two men from completely different backgrounds and different parts of the world end up in the same place under the most horrific circumstances?
Hmm.
So yeah, and I've never served. I'm not a veteran, and I really felt it was like, the one thing I could do to really honor our vets. My dad was a vet. So many in my family are. My great uncle was killed in World War II. So I felt like I did owe something in terms of my creative abilities to honor those who serve.
Oh, that's amazing. We will definitely put a link to that, and that's where did you say folks could see that one?
It's on YouTube if they search A Hero Among Us, though there may be other things that come up, but I can get you that link and
Uh,
you can put that.
yeah,
Um,
I'll be able to search for that and find that for to have in as the show goes live tonight.
yeah.
Cool.
Okay, great.
So
Yeah.
so it sounds like you've got a lot of different hats that you wear, and you're working full time at a production company. How do you figure that all out?
Well, actually, I work for a nonprofit now, and I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's. But I'm like the marketing director, and I'm still doing what I've always done, which is telling stories.
Hmm.
And I guess I just learned a while back that I got to work for like the mission instead of the man.
Hmm.
I'm just not motivated by making other
Yeah.
people rich, but they are great. I'm kind of paid now for more what I know than what I do, and they've I have a flexible schedule. As I said, the kids are grown out of the house, so I have more time. I probably haven't had this much time on my hands since like I was in school, or
Gotcha.
something like that. And not to mention, the pandemic 2020. I was laid off for a few months, and the government kept like throwing me money, and I was actually making more on unemployment at the time than I was working.
Nice.
So I'm like, I'm taking this windfall, and I'm squirreling it into my home theater.
That's awesome. And I know you said you got two albums. Are you working on your third?
I am. I just released my second one last week,
Hmm.
and that that's really about. Well, it's an homage to NASA and the space program,
Okay.
and it really tracks progress from, say, pre-space program to the Apollo. I've sampled some content off the golden disk
Oh,
that was
neat.
installed in Voyager
Yeah,
2.
yeah. I remember that.
And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I'm building basic soundscapes that are inspired by space or exploration. And I know that just sounds really geeky,
Oh, no, no.
but
I love that. That sounds.
but but like
What's the name of it? And where can folks find it?
it's called Distant Worlds. Distant
Okay.
Worlds, Brent Watkins, and it's on any streaming platform.
Okay.
It's available wherever fine music is sold.
Well, but folks should find it on Apple Music for the Atmos version, I'm
I would
assuming.
strongly encourage
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. So, other than the next album, what's next for you?
So my son is very much a musician. In many ways, I think he's as capable as, if not more so, than I am. He actually scored the music in the second film, A Hero Among Us,
Okay.
and he is doing work. I won't say we work I won't say we work in the same genre, but our work is very simpatico. I mean, we're orbiting each other, and it's just so darn cool to be able to create with one of my kids.
Oh,
And
it's amazing.
you know, with the movie project, I also use my other son, who's like a top-notch artist and graphic designer, works for national ad agency, and he does the design for all our album covers and did all our illustrations for this film. And so we are really a family. We're close knit family, but we're really family of artists. And so this next project is collaborating with my son. It's based on the Latin phases of the moon. So I mean, you quickly understand that when I say I'm a cosmic musician and fan, I really am. Okay. But it's the album, the working title for the album was Lunae Tempus, which is Latin for the lunar phases.
Cool.
And so, yeah, each track will be a phase of the moon.
Well, that's awesome. When that comes out, you definitely got to ping me. We'll make sure it gets featured on Home Theater Forum as
I,
well.
I really appreciate that, Sam. Thank you so much.
Well, anything else that you'd like to promote or talk about? That I know you've got a really wild background and a lot of experiences.
Yeah, and people say I should write a book. I'm, like I have time for that. It's like I am just really, really fortunate. I don't forget for one moment how fortunate I am to be able to have the resources and the time to create. I'm aware of that because of what I said before. When I was a kid, when I was young, when I was in my 20s, I couldn't afford any of this. I
Yep.
mean, um, young people today have that benefit of all this technology that has made creating so much more affordable. And even though as musicians, it's like an ocean. I mean, that's resulted in such an exponential increase of content in production in independent film and certainly in independent music. I mean, the chances of being discovered, I'm not deluding myself. It's like tossing a bottle into the ocean with your CD or with your
Sure.
message or
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, and hoping someone picks it up. I mean, we've got that about that good odds of like you know getting our big break, but it doesn't matter to me because this is my therapy. This is how I get to bond with my kids. I don't need to be rich or famous. I just need to be my best creative self. So that's really why I do what I do.
That's amazing, and I definitely can appreciate that, and definitely feel very strongly in the same way. That's why I picked up photography. That's why I started the podcast. Is you got to feed that. I'm by no means any kind of artist. I come from an engineering background, and the
Oh, come on now.
no, I'm telling you I mean, I also tell people, I'm a classic introvert, right? So it's
Mm.
work and you can do the work. You can do the work and learn this stuff and build those skills and build those muscles. So,
Well, I'll
for
tell you,
folks,
looking at my dad's Dynakit, the one thing I remembered was how incredibly fascinating it was. And that was the work of an engineer.
yep.
So I thought it was a work of art.
Nice, nice. And like I said, we all come to these endeavors in our own direction, and I appreciate it. Hearing about your journey, and I very much look forward to pulling up some of your music. Uh, Unfortunately, I was away this week with some issues with my folks, so I didn't get a chance to veg for an hour and listen to some of your music. But that's next up on my journey. So I will give you feedback once I've gotten through that myself.
Oh, man, I'm holding you to that. If I don't hear
Yep.
back from you,
Yeah,
I'll
please
be
do.
saying, come on.
Please do. Well, I believe you've agreed to play our little game. Is that true?
I have.
All right. So we'll throw the theme music on for our copyright violation here. And we'll take it back down just just to
To
be
avoid getting
consistent.
sued.
Exactly. Yeah. I think if I'm less than 10 seconds, I've
Mhm.
got very little chance of being sued. So I know what my title is. Can you tell us what your title is tonight?
AI,
AI.
artificial intelligence,
Okay.
2001 film by none other
2001.
than the great Steven Spielberg.
Okay, so you, as our guest, you have your choice. Would you like me to go first with my selection, or you want to go with first with yours?
Go for it.
Okay, so my good, bad, or ugly this week is also Steven Spielberg. His latest production called The Fablemans, which tracks a family in the, I'm going to call it 60s and 70s, with a young artist who is interested in filmmaking. And his family has a little bit of dysfunction, and they're dragged across the U.S. by a father who is not an artist; he's an engineer. So, going to work building the first series of high-speed computers for IBM and other companies. Have you seen The Fablemans?
I have not. It is on my list.
Okay.
Like as in this weekend, my wife and I were going to watch it.
Okay. So, what little you know about me and my love of movies, do you think that The Fablemans for me was good, bad, or ugly?
Okay. So I'm going to have to take an analytical approach here because I don't know you as well as I probably should and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully will. But okay, so it's no secret it's Steven Spielberg's biopic, self like autobiopic is that
Yep.
word?
It's thinly veiled.
Yeah, and some are even saying, "Ooh, maybe it's his swan song. Maybe this is it, and he's
Mm.
out." So it's like with that kind of aura surrounding it, some people can really do. I mean, they say that the easiest story to tell is your own. Okay, so I have to believe it's good because I believe that that would probably be him at his best. I don't know. I mean. Do you
Yep.
have like, yeah?
You would have hoped. I I am among the top 1% of Steven Spielberg lovers. I loved everything he did. Um this did not work for me. Um Boy, where to even start with it? There are no compelling characters on it, and I say that knowing that I may be talking about Steven Spielberg's own life. So there's that. Um, it goes.
Your
It's.
sigh alone,
I
it's
know
like it speaks volumes, just that sigh right there.
it starts okay, but goes nowhere. Have you seen what was it? Something like This Boy's Life, and then there was the Netflix film, the big Oscar winner a couple years back about the family in Italy.
Yes.
What was the
God,
name of
what
that?
was the name of that? I
Oh,
can't.
I will think of it at. But
Yeah.
it's the same kind of deal, man. It's like a slice of life that I don't care about, and
Wow.
they're
Yeah.
they're vaguely interesting things that happen, but no, Spielberg, I'm sorry, buddy. Sorry, sir. And I say that as somebody who won back when he was 13, Steven Spielberg's director's chair national contest.
What?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I it was one of his first video games to take FMV clips and make your own movie, and I was one of the finalists for that.
Amazing. That's an
So
amazing
yeah,
story.
yeah, that was a better film than this. I
Yeah.
think I do not like talking trash about anybody's art of any kind, because just getting any movie out is a miracle.
Right.
Maybe you're born on third base if you're coming from Steven Spielberg, but boy, this
Yeah.
one did not work for me.
Well, that's too bad. I'm
Yeah.
still going to watch it because
Yeah,
I'll
please
be
do.
interested.
I,
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear what you thought, especially since your selection is one of his others that might not be in his top 10, but is interesting, is AI. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it
Sure.
before I guess whether you thought it was good, bad, or ugly?
Sure. And I'll just say, hey, I'm right there with you. Got to be one of his top 1% fans. To say how inspiring and almost godlike his presence has been in cinema would be almost an
Yep.
understatement. So, fellow fan here,
Yep.
and coming from that perspective. So I had to work on this so that I felt like if I ad libbed that any kind of that I tip my hand. So let me just read
Okay.
you kind of like a copy paste
Okay.
summary of AI. So Haley Joel Osment, who is most known for being Forrest Gump's son, stars as David, which is a mecha, MECHA, like mechanized mecha,
Yep.
or robot of the future, when the polar ice caps have melted and submerged many coastal cities, causing worldwide starvation and human dependence on robotic assistance. The first mecha designed to experience love, David is the son of Henry, played by Sam Robards, an employee of the company that built the boy, and the grief-stricken Monica, played by Frances O'Connor. David is meant to replace the couple's hopelessly comatose son, but when their natural child recovers, David is abandoned and sets out to become a real boy, air
Mm.
quotes, a real boy, worthy of his mother's affection. Along the way, David is mentored by a pleasure-providing mecha named Gigolo Joe, played by Jude Law,
Yep.
and a talking super toy bear named Teddy. His adventures take him to the Roman circus style flesh fair, where mechas are destroyed for the amusement of humans, Rouge City, where Gigolo Joe narrowly avoids capture by the police, and finally, a submerged New York City, where David's creator, Professor Hobby, played by William Hurt, reveals the secrets of the boy's creation.
Mm. Now, see, the way that you have written that, I would watch that movie.
Mm, yeah.
Originally, AI did not work for me. I would
Oh,
have.
so you have watched
Oh,
the
I
movie.
have seen AI. I saw it in the theater when it came out.
So
Uh,
you gotta guess though,
I
because
do, I do, but
okay.
I'm working my way to that.
All right, all right.
Um, and so up until the Fablemans, I would have put AI at the least of Steven Spielberg's movies, and so
Really,
now it's the penultimate least. Um,
really.
but I think it might have kind of earned its space more in the 22 years since I've seen it. Obviously, AI is a bigger part of our society today. Maybe not on the robotic side, but at least on the machine learning.
Well, not to
And
mention the whole, global warming thing is a hell of a lot more
yeah,
present now than it
yeah.
was, in 2001, even though it was, yeah, it's still a known problem then.
Yeah, the Pinocchio overtones turned me off,
Hmm.
especially combined with the childlike innocence, contrasted with the adult capabilities of the mechas.
Okay.
I think you found this to be a good movie. Okay, well then we're more simpatico than I thought.
Well, now you have to tell me, did I think it was bad or did I think it was ugly?
Well, hmm, if it wasn't good, it may be all the way to ugly.
You would be correct.
Okay, good, good,
I
good.
felt it was an absolutely awful film. It was, first of all, it was an incoherent plot.
Yep.
Okay, I thought it was going to be. I thought at the beginning I thought was really intriguing.
Yes.
I thought it was going to be, this android who, oh, you think he's going to be jealous because the comatose boy you were sure was going to die is actually, revived by the
Yep.
miracle of their modern health. And he comes in, and so you're thinking, okay, it'll be the android who gets jealous, of course. But no, it turns out the revived, renewed, actual, real son is the devil incarnate. I mean, and he's evil. And then I'm like, okay, we've got a movie that's like turning the tables, where the son that the android should be getting jealous about is actually being tortured by the son. And then it was like, oh, what a brilliant way to get the audience on the android's side.
Yep.
But what actually happened to me, it was like, well, first of all, I hate being emotionally manipulated.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's very clear from almost the beginning, though you're willing to roll with it. He tried to pull me into the anthropomorphism of androids. With the countless shots of Haley Joel Osment staring into the camera, begging to be loved, right?
Yep.
Well, fuck the boy Andrew named David. Tear his face off. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not having any of it, because he's given me no reason to care.
Or root for him, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And furthermore, okay, so Mech World, it's like the original Blade Runner if the sets were designed by a carny worker on meth. I mean, that place was just full of these spectacular images that actually made very little sense. Not to mention, you've got this 8-year-old boy wandering around in this wonder world of sex workers with a gigolo who's all about adult, being like, he makes no bones about his lovemaking techniques. All of this struck me as like really creepy and not in a good way.
Yeah, so it struck me kind of like the Dracula movies and stuff like that. Like this kid could have the intelligence of a 1,000-year machine.
Yes.
But has the face of an 8-year-old boy. But they didn't do that. It was totally indulgent in the adult world stuff, and then didn't make any interesting points about it, or what could happen, or that this kid could be the start of the AI revolution or something. It started nowhere and went nowhere. Okay, so good, I'm remembering it right.
Your instincts have not failed you.
Well, they failed me on whether you might like it.
Yes, but you hardly know. Let's be real, we hardly know each other.
I didn't want to insult you by saying it was ugly if you thought it was good, but I'm glad we're on the same page. That's amazing.
Not being able to guess my opinion, that can be forgiven.
Yeah.
Actually liking the film, that cannot be forgiven.
I'm sure there are fans out there.
I'm sorry, we're going to hear from them too, aren't we?
I guess so. Well, Brent, this has been an amazing hour. I'm very much looking forward to listening to your first couple albums. We're going to point folks to your background so that they can check out your documentaries, and if I get a chance to, I will check at least one, if not both of them, out this weekend myself. And I really appreciate you walking us through the current state of Atmos production. I think it's a growth industry. I think Apple is really gonna make it so that anybody, even knuckleheads like me, can do Atmos production sooner than later. Maybe not with a level of skill and talent that folks with your background have, but just getting past the technological hurdles is the first step. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Thanks so much, Sam. This has been an absolute hoot doing this with you. I've had a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your support.
Oh, no problem. It was great making your acquaintance, and thumbs up to Reddit on this one. I'm still banned from commenting in /r/home theater, so a little salty about that.
I am too.
Are you? Oh, we gotta talk about this. Hold the phone. Take down the sound clip. Yeah, tell me about that.
Oh, well, I mean, it's I was really bitching at the mods about how poorly moderated it was, and I speak as a moderator for a sub. And it's just turned into a toxic waste dump.
Oh, I can't tell you how happy it makes me to hear you say that, but continue.
It is. And I'm not even going to divulge, because which sub did we meet in? Was it home theater?
I don't know because
I don't think it
I sent
was.
you a PM on
It
wherever you
doesn't
had
matter.
posted the production stuff. Might have been
Yeah,
in
and I was
Atmos. I don't
doing
know.
that in surround. I think that was like surround audio file or something.
Something
At
like
any
that.
rate, I don't think it was, because apparently we're both banned.
Yeah, couldn't have been home theater. So,
Yeah, yeah. No,
so
and I have to say, audiophile is not too far off either. I mean, it's sad to
mm,
see so many people feel like they have to prove how much they know. You know,
uh,
it is.
well, all of Reddit's home theater listeners should come to Home Theater Forum. Let's put it that way, because they're the
Definitely, I'm
friendliest.
coming. I will be
Awesome.
there.
No, I was banned because there was a thread that said, "What are your favorite Atmos demo discs?" And
Oh,
I literally only replied to a guy that, "Hey, I actually did a podcast about that, and here's the top 10. If you want to listen to the show,
oh,
here's a
oh,
link to it."
yeah.
It wasn't my own post or anything like that. It was a reply to a guy who asked, and they banned me for that. And so
All the
it
alarms went off
it
at the mods' homes.
it's a lifetime ban at a home theater.
That's unreasonable.
It
I'm
wasn't
sorry. I
even
just
like a
got to tell.
2-weeker or something, you know?
That's unreasonable.
Yeah,
See,
so
I'm temporarily banned.
oh,
So,
okay. All
yeah.
right. Well, I
So,
I can say fuck the Reddit mods, and you can say
yes,
fuck the Reddit
yes.
mods for 2 weeks.
All right. All right.
All right. Well, we're more simpatico than we thought, sir.
We
We'll
really are.
we'll take it out on that. Brent, it's been hilarious. I appreciate it. I'm glad we got the sound fixed, and I appreciate all your input. So thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Have a good night. Bye now.
You too.
Good
Bye.
night, everybody.